All right, everyone. My name is Rich Martin. I'm Director of Technical Marketing. And in this session, you've already set us up from the last session, talking about how we can leverage automations and how you can kind of string them together. That's exactly what this session's about. We're running short on time, so let's get right to the demo, which is probably great for you guys, right? So the thing the role I'm representing is the orchestration architect, okay? Started off as a network engineer, determined that I didn't want to be a manager, but I went to the network architecture group. We've started seeing Wyatt and all the awesome automations that they have created. It really became apparent to us that it would be a good idea to be able to tie all these automations together, one after another. And so that gives birth to this whole new shiny title called Orchestration Architect, which is who I am. So in the Itential platform, I'm going to give you an overview of what this looks like to start to build this out. So looking through here, you'll see that I'm in a workflow canvas, and a workflow canvas is where I start to build my orchestration. Now recall, in this particular product, we have 3 automations we need to run. My best friend in this part of our platform is the task palette here. This task palette is everything I need to start building workflows. Now workflows themselves, we're going to orchestrate these 3 automations together. However, it's more than just that. I have to think in terms of a process that delivers a service, and that's more than just the 3 infrastructure pieces that I need to call from the automation side. I really need to also think about in terms of integrating other systems together, because this is more than, I might need to talk to a Git repository and pull some product definitions from there. I might need to integrate with some other source of truth or IPAM system as part of this process. Maybe even drop some notifications in Slack or Teams or something like that to let people know what's going on. So I need to have all of that there, as well as building the logic for the workflow. Again, it's not just firing off 3 workflows one after another. What if one of those workflows goes awry? Of course, it never happens in your environment, but in my environment, it does happen. So I need to have some sort of logic. And so the toolbox is where I really have all of those features. I have the ability to build the logic, evaluate things, and then also I have integrations into the different systems that I might need access to. So if I click on GitLab here, you'll see that I have basically API endpoint calls that are available from GitLab. So how did this get into my palette? Well, basically, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can download an integration. It's freely available from our automation marketplace. You put it into the system. You configure it with your credentials, and now you can expose all or some of the API endpoints from any one of these systems. In this case, I have all of them. I also have access to the different applications in our solution. So the automation services in our last section that were published are also available here as a series of tasks. Now, when I get started, it looks like we're on a blank canvas, and we are, but I have all of this available to me right from the very beginning. So as an automation, as somebody who's building this orchestration, I want to start by running one script, right? And a lot of times, even if I know all the functions, I'm very proficient in this, I start off very simply. I create a task called a stub task, and I can drag it onto the workflow. And now I'm starting to create the first step in my automation. A stub task is just a placeholder. I just want to visualize what I want to do. In this case, if I double click it, I get access to the variables behind it. In this case, it's a stub task. It's a placeholder. This is like a whiteboard for me right now. And I can run the AWS service. I know this is what I want to do. And that service is an automation that my colleague Wyatt has published. Now, we saw in the last demo, in order to run the automation, you got to feed it some amount of information, right? So I have to think in terms of a product that's going to be consumed probably by an API. So the information, that payload that comes in could be an API payload. It could be a form. All of those things are available to me, but I'm thinking in terms of delivering a product. So remember, I'm in between the product managers and all the automations and infrastructure. So I need to tie all these things together. And a lot of times when you get a payload of information, you may not need all of it. You may need some of it. You may need to extract information and manipulate it. So we have a task for that called a transformation task. So as a best practice, we typically put a transformation task in front of one of these automation tasks. That way, it's a placeholder for now, but I know if I get some information in, I can manipulate that data and feed it to the automation task that I've stubbed out here, and put that data in the right format that's required for that particular task. This would be the same for an API call, right? If I was calling directly into a cloud service API to do a VPC, they define what the API payload needs to look like, so my transformation task could be used to manipulate the data that comes from different sources to feed to that. And then finally, when you run a service, you're going to get some amount of information back out of it. And sometimes that information is relevant for some other part of your orchestrated workflow, right? If I pull an IP address from an IPAM in order to use it, I need to now use it and maybe use it for a VPC that I'm creating or something like that. So I need to extract that output. And one of those features that we can use here is a query. And now I'm starting to stub out the basics of my workflow. So now I can now build transition lines between these tasks so that I can execute them in order. And I start to build this out. So this is kind of the framework for generating that first automation that you guys were talking about earlier. You kind of set this up. How do I run one automation after the next, after the next? The orchestration architect, that's what I do. So I start it this way. And now if I continue down this road to take a look at what it looks like, I'm going to progress this. Maybe this is the next day I'm looking at this again. I've started to fill out the specific information for a transformation, for child job, and for these other tasks. And in fact, I've replaced the stub task with this child job task. So what this does is a child job allows me to run another workflow inside of this workflow. So if you think in terms of a subroutine or a function call, it's like that. But what's really cool is now I can start as the architect building all these workflows. I can start building them in a modular way so that they can be reused by me or by anybody else on my team. Hopefully I'm expanding past just the me on the orchestration architecture team, and they can start to leverage that. And that's where you can see these assets start to pop up. And in fact, the transformations that you build, and we have other assets here, forms, templates, Jinja templates, text FSF templates, transformations and workflows, all become drag and drop tasks on our palette. So if I drag on a child job, it turns, or a workflow that I've built as a modular workflow, it becomes a child job here. And so now I can start to build this out and actually run and test it. So in this case, this run AWS service looks something like this. I've built it into a modular workflow. Actually, I'll do this one manually. And then I can run it. Let's see. And this gives me the ability to test while I'm in the workflow canvas. So here's a payload that I can feed to it manually. Of course, once again, this could come from an API call. This could come from a form. If I run this payload now, this gives you the ability to see the workflow executing in real time, one task after another. So in the first step, it ran this task. This is a service that was published through the automation gateway in the last session. If I double click here, I can see the incoming variables. So this is the payload I just passed to it. It becomes the input for this service. And then once again, the output of this service is a bunch of data. So all of this data is not necessarily relevant to me. I'm really just looking for standard out. So I can use this query. I can use the input, which is that full payload, query out what I need. And so the output for the query task becomes that data. And when I'm testing, I have a series of workflows that can actually stop the workflow so that I can kind of see what's going on. So in this case, I can just work this. And I can see the information here, verify that, yep, it ran exactly as it should have, and then start to maybe take that task out and continue it down the line as I start to iterate this workflow. So if I go back to where we started from, we take a look at workflow number 2, I would then progress this. I'm fairly happy with the way this worked out. I'm running one of those particular automation services. Now I can progress it to look like something like this. So what is this? This looks a little more complicated, but it actually isn't. It's literally just a copy and paste of that first stack. And I'm changing some of the transformations here that are relevant to these particular tasks. Every one of these child jobs is running one of those automations from the automation gateway. So I'm leveraging all that work that's already been done. And this is how I can start to string all of these things together. But again, it's not just firing one after another. I'm surrounding it with the logic to input the information it needs. I'm surrounding it with the ability to query out the information from that particular task so it can be used in the next task or in subsequent tasks down the workflow. And then finally, I can layer on some of the logic that we need to. So what happens if one of these particular tasks doesn't operate right? We can use our queries and use a failure transition. So in this case, if the query comes back null, I can handle it in some other way. I can run another workflow, a series of workflows. I can revert it. I can roll it back. I can do whatever I need to do. Because again, we need to be able to build intelligence into this based off of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, this puts me in a great spot to now talk to Dan, my project manager, and say, Dan, I've done the create workflow. This is what I've built. But in addition to that, I can now leverage that and create the delete workflow, and then talk to Dan and find out what other workflows do we need in order to productize this service.
When will you be enabling like the marketplace or the app store or like the community sharing?
So all of the assets that I showed in the task palette already exist for the items that I'm using on that workflow canvas. So the integrations, transformations, things like that, they're already public.
Just for like for the team that developed it, right?
No, those are publicly available for anybody.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Me personally, if I'm building that, then I can make those available immediately inside the platform. They're already available immediately.
So there's somewhere that I could go and say, oh,
Yeah.
I'm trying to do,
Yeah,
trying to build this, a connection between AWS
yeah,
VPCs. Let me see if somebody else already invented this.
For that in
right?
the automation marketplace
Because
today.
at the end of the day, that's all.
Yeah.
That's what all automation is just
Right.
finding someone else that almost did it the same way you need, and then
Right.
Making it.
futzing around with it. Yeah.
The Stack Overflow for Itential.
Yeah. The Stack Overflow of network automation, right?
Hey, it's Malcolm again. Could I ask, could you give a couple of real-life use case examples for what you just demonstrated? So, what would you actually apply that to in real life?
So, I mean, this is probably one of the real life scenarios here. We're trying to deliver a service that transits across cloud. We need some firewall resources. We need something set up maybe in the data center for it's a new IP address over the transit gateway. So being able to leverage all three of those automations together and deliver that as a service that our app devs can request themselves through APIs. I mean, you can...
It's like automating a runbook type thing. Is it like creating a runbook and then automating the different components in order to deliver an end-to-end change?
I think it goes beyond runbook, but the same principle applies. Yes.